ocean is the vital life support system of the planet. It provides necessary resources for the development of humankind and most other species. Present and future societies will depend on healthy oceans, not only for food, but for the regulation of climate and the generation of the oxygen that we breathe. The oceans also serve as a foundation for a considerable amount of the world's economy through sectors such as tourism and fisheries. Ocean health has been in decline for the past 50 years, and most significantly in the past 2 decades, where we have seen large-scale negative impacts such as ocean warming and acidification, sea level rise, and overfishing affecting marine species and their habitats. Among the most affected species are sharks, who maintain marine ecosystem balance and can be an excellent indicator of ocean health. Sharks are facing a large-scale extinction due to rapid population decline and habitat destruction, both brought on by human activities. The decline in global shark populations will not only affect the ocean food web, but will also have a significant ecological impact on marine organisms and their habitats, thus negatively affecting human health and well-being worldwide. To maintain the quality of life that the oceans provide while sustaining the integrity of their biodiversity and ecosystems, changes in how we view, manage, and use oceans, seas, and marine resources must happen quickly. In this decade, named for ocean science, United Nations member states have called for holistic and integrated approaches to sustainable development that will guide humanity to live in harmony with nature and lead efforts to restore the health and integrity of the Earth's ecosystems. The most stressed among these ecosystems was the oceans and seas and their resources. What this means is that to achieve sustainable development, we need to look at humans and nature as interconnected. In the context of the oceans, we need to acknowledge the relation between ocean health, human health, economic growth, food security, and the creation of sustainable livelihoods. This is why the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 14, Life Below Water, was created to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. Within the Sustainable Development Goal number 14, there are 10 important indicators of threats determined by the UN as a tool to evaluate and improve ocean health. There are also 10 targets to be met. They are, among others, marine pollution, unsustainable fishing and extraction of marine resources, and the destruction of marine and coastal habitats. Undeniable scientific evidence has shown time and time again that human activities are negatively impacting our oceans. However, science has also shown that there is a great possibility for improvement. So I've traveled to the big island of Hawaii to meet with marine biologist and shark scientist David McGuire to learn more about the current state of our oceans and how we can attain marine conservation goals.
My name is David McGuire. I'm the founder and director of the nonprofit Stewards.
The ocean health and shark conservation nonprofit Stewards is dedicated to saving sharks and protecting critical marine habitat.
Pollution has become an increasing problem in the global ocean in the last 50 years, especially most significantly around the last 2 decades with the exponential use of plastics. Around 8 to 10 million tons of plastic enters the ocean every single year, and it's a serious problem affecting all trophic levels from the bottom of the food chain all the way up to the sharks. The real problem we're finding is that these plastics are breaking up into smaller and smaller microfibers and microplastics that get ingested by plankton, that get eaten by planktivores, again going up all the way the trophic level to the apex predators. Apex predators like sharks and in some cases killer whales, orcas, will biomagnify or bioaccumulate toxins. And they're very long-lived, sometimes 100 years. And so over time, those chemicals affect the health, the welfare, the functioning of that animal. When humans eat apex predators like bluefin tuna, they also will bioaccumulate organic toxins like methylmercury, heavy metals that can interfere with your immune system. Some of the plastic toxins are mutagens. So in general, it's not a good idea to have plastic in the ocean.
The mass production and disposal of plastic and synthetic goods can be found in every aspect of human life, from the clothes we wear to the products we purchase and the food we eat. For sharks specifically, when they ingest plastic through the food chain, there can be significant repercussions. A study on sharks in the North Atlantic discovered that 67% of sampled sharks had ingested microplastic and microfibers, further outlining the pervasiveness of marine pollution. Not only does marine pollution have physical health impacts on sharks, but it can also disrupt their ability to effectively hunt and keep other species regulated. Single-use plastics are especially dangerous to marine life, as they can become entangled and accidentally ingest or consume plastics. There is also a growing concern around the toxicity of heavy metals, plastic-derived chemicals, and other substances leached from microplastics that have been proven to cause damage to reproductive, nervous system, and cardiovascular systems in both marine life and humans. Countries around the world have started phasing out single-use plastics, and significant measures have been implemented to reduce or remove these plastics from common uses. However, significant amounts of plastic waste are still present in global oceans and on beaches. Plastics are still circulating in our environment. Therefore, we have a ways to go before these are fully phased out and properly disposed of. An ideal solution to protect and restore marine habitats is through marine protected areas. Also known as MPAs, these are optimal to shield threatened marine species and ecosystems from human activity and provide a space for biodiversity to rebuild and flourish again. Many MPAs can also be beneficial to research scientists. There are also specific MPAs focused on shark conservation. These are called shark sanctuaries. Shark sanctuaries are specific geographical areas designed within a country's territorial waters, each with its own regulations, usually forbidding commercial fishing operations from targeting and retaining sharks, including their fins. The first shark sanctuary was created by Palau in 2009. It was then followed by the Maldives, Honduras, the Bahamas, and many more. These areas are especially impactful where shark tourism is present and have continued growing significantly throughout the past decade, showing remarkable benefits on shark populations and their ecosystems. Despite the growing popularity of MPAs, only about 11 million square miles of ocean fall within these protected areas. And when compared to the total 139 million square miles of global ocean, there is still quite a lot of room for increase.
The original Sustainable Development Goals established by the United Nations at Aichi in 2011 were manifest to try to improve protection for emerging nations or developing nations that are critically reliant upon ocean resources. It also dealt with ecosystem protections, overfishing, and many other aspects of trying to protect our oceans and marine life. One of those goals under Sustainable Development Goal 14, Life Below Water, was to increase marine protection in nearshore habitat, but also critical habitat in the ocean, protecting 10% of ocean spaces by 2010. We failed to meet that goal. In 2023, we have about 7% of our oceans protected. Only about 3% of that is fully protected under no-take marine protected areas or marine reserves. The new goals are now to protect 30% by 2030. Fortunately, the rate of increase of marine protected areas has increased significantly, both in the United States and in other nations. So we're seeing countries like Chile, Panama, particularly in Central America, establishing these no-take reserves in marine protected areas. In California, we've protected 16% of our state waters, and then we have another significant portion almost achieving that 30% goal in our federal waters. Hawaii has established protected areas both in the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument and nearshore marine protected areas, also approaching 30% marine protection. Ecosystem protection and management is critical for the health of humans and, of course, the marine life that live in those ecosystems. That means you need to protect habitat, in some cases, protecting the fundamental base of the food chain or infrastructure like coral reefs or seagrass beds. One of the major goals is to protect not just fisheries and people who rely on fisheries, but protecting where those fish live.
The ocean absorbs over 25% of the world's carbon and over 90% of excess heat generated by these emissions. Therefore, the ocean can be considered one of the world's largest carbon sinks. Ocean acidification slows the rate at which coral reefs generate calcium carbonate, thus slowing the growth of coral skeletons, which also makes them more prone to coral bleaching.
One of the major impacts affecting not only human health and environmental health, but the entire health of the planet, of course, is global warming. The oceans are as much as 1 to 2 degrees higher than they used to be historically, at least when humans were around. It's undeniable that the oceans are warmer. In the past 100 years or so, because of the burning of fossil fuels, we're seeing a lot of that carbon sink into the ocean, going to the deep currents. And now, 300 to 500 years later, we're seeing that carbon come back up and reintroduce itself. It's affecting not only the sea surface temperatures, it also is affecting the acidity of the ocean. This lowering pH is causing a problem for accessibility of the building blocks for reef-building organisms like coral reefs or shell-building organisms like snails or some of the calcareous plankton. It's a problem when you don't have the bottom of the food chain or you don't have habitat that is host to hundreds, if not thousands, of different species that rely on that infrastructure. The double whammy of warming sea surface temperature, altering global climate, weather patterns is creating a whole mass migration in different areas of the oceans. There are several impacts on sharks, from overfishing to fishing as bycatch to global warming and loss of habitat. There was a scientific survey done on reef sharks that showed reef sharks are absent from 20% of areas that had been surveyed. This is an alarming situation because reef sharks are keeping the trophic level stable and healthy on reef systems. Island nations require healthy reefs for their food sources to buffer storm damage, to reduce some of the impacts of global warming. Unfortunately, we're losing coral reefs and reef sharks and reef fish associated with them. So in many cases, we're seeing almost a complete absence of reef sharks or a huge decline in reef sharks on coral reefs where they were once abundant. It's definitely a problem we're going to be living through the next millennia or the rest of the span of humanity if we don't act now. "20 years ago, when I started working in marine conservation and shark protection specifically, shark finning was the major impact affecting shark populations globally. There was a gold rush for shark fins to make shark fin soup. Since that time, it's been condemned by the United Nations. Most large fishing countries condemn the practice of killing sharks just for the fins. Implementing fin trade bans has helped put a dent and intervene in the trade of wildlife, essentially shark fin or manta ray gill rakers, for either luxury shark fin soup or, in the case of manta rays, traditional Chinese medicine. Most of the fins go to China, and the increase in wealth has resulted in an increase in demand for luxury products like shark fin soup. So that demand continues. It's been diminished somewhat because of activists and also restrictions, both federally, internationally, and also statewide. However, there is still a huge demand for sharks, unfortunately, and it's not just for the fins. Fisheries are focusing from other predators that have gone into decline, like bluefin tuna, like yellowfin tuna, and shifting to species like sharks for food, sometimes for fertilizer, also for the fins. So even though the shark fin trade and shark finning laws have been implemented, sharks are not off the hook. Sharks are also a casualty of bycatch. Historically, sharks were let go, sometimes alive, if they're on a long line and still breathing. Now they're killed for their fins and sometimes the entire body if the fishermen are fishing legally. Bycatch has a huge impact on many species of sharks because they drown in nets or on long lines and are discarded or caught as secondary catch. One of the major problems facing not just sharks, but all big fish is overfishing. We went from World War II, from war on each other to war on the ocean, and became highly efficient at scraping everything out through giant nets, through giant fleets, to the point that a study that was done in 2003 by Boris Wern and Ransom Myers suggested that 90% of all large fish populations had collapsed. And that was 20 years ago. And we haven't fished any less. So we're fishing down the big fish, and unfortunately we're not stopping there. We're fishing the herring, the sardines, the base of the food chain, but also the krill. One of the largest impacts on the oceans is that we're treating it like this endless supply, and it's not. And it's going to affect the health of the ocean as well as the health of humanity unless we regulate this. There have been significant steps at trying to reduce overfishing internationally under the regional fisheries management organizations under the United Nations. But unfortunately, these fisheries organizations are political. The quotas are often set too high, and the fish populations cannot withstand that. In the US, we manage our fisheries under the guise of what's called maximum sustainable yield, MSL. That may not be the best strategy either. That means you can take as much as you want until the point where it can no longer replenish itself. Typically in the US, with strong laws and strong enforcement, we realize when stocks are diminishing and we're able to pass laws and stop that fishing. And we've done that successfully in the case of many fisheries that actually are able to recover. So by applying good science and then recognizing we need to adhere to the goals by the fisheries managers, the ocean can actually recover. Regulating trade, regulating consumption of seafood is highly important. The value keeps going up. The value of a fish like bluefin tuna, it goes up as the supplies diminish. There's more demand, and the people who can afford it will continue to pay higher and higher dollars, which in turn incentivize fishermen who ordinarily wouldn't go out to fish those fish to go out and sell them for that high value, which in turn creates this domino effect affecting the big fish. We can turn this around. We can ask where our seafood comes from. We don't need to eat fish every day, particularly if you live in the West. We can treat fish more as eating wildlife, eating a rare commodity, and not a common day thing like fish sticks. Treasure it a little bit more, and we might be able to sustainably eat fish if we can manage the fisheries. Achieving the 30% marine protection is a huge and lofty goal, but I think we can do it. We're seeing an increase in protected areas, but also in high-value protected areas, as well as marine protected areas that are well understood, well studied, but also well studied with baseline data. So applying good science is critical towards good marine management, including deciding where you're going to protect an area. We need quality marine protected areas, as well as an area of the ocean that's large enough that will benefit areas outside the ocean, which is one of the largest benefits of marine protected areas. There's something in marine protected area management called the spillover effect, and especially in California, which has a network of ecosystem interconnected marine protected areas, we're seeing in some cases 300 to 400% more biomass, more abundance in the MPAs than outside. So that means fishermen will fish the edge of that MPA because they're seeing an increase in harvestable species, and that's a good sign. How can the average person support marine protection? Observing marine protected areas in place and not violating the law is a good place to start. Supporting science or supporting public recognition or education in protecting or roping off parts of the sea, if you will help support species that live inside of those MPAs. Pushing our governments, pushing our international bodies like the United Nations to live up to the goals of Aichi, the development goals set in 2011 and higher goals set later by the United Nations. We're not there yet. We need to recognize that scientists have recommended, governments, 190 or more countries who have signed the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, live up to your commitments. And that's what we as people, as consumers, as voters can do, is urge our legislators, urge our representatives to meet those goals, to live up to those words, to be honest and do what they say they're going to do. And that's really where the power of the many, the people, come in. We have more power than ever to have our voice heard through social media, through a lot of these channels. We can use our voice to insist upon protecting the ocean, because we must protect the ocean. And we can't wait any longer. The time is now. We are losing our fish, our coral reefs, and it's not going to get any easier with increasing adverse climate change impacts.
The degree of implementation of international instruments aiming to combat illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is increasing. However, certain countries heavily contributing to IUU fishing are not being adequately monitored or reprimanded. In order to stop overfishing, countries need to be held accountable when national or international laws and goals that were agreed upon are not being met.
Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing, is piracy on the high seas. 20%, it's estimated, of all fish caught globally are IUU fish. These fisheries employ brutal techniques, unsustainable practices, in some cases outright slavery, to collect and sell fish that unknowing consumers eat. Regulating fisheries is critical. We can do it in the US pretty well because we've got eyes in the sky, we have a satellite system, we've got a Navy, we've got a Coast Guard, and yet it's almost impossible to regulate the high seas. 64% of the global ocean, which is about 2/3 of our planet, is high seas, meaning outside 200-mile limit that was set by the UN Law of the Sea. It's hard to enforce 200 miles out. How can you enforce 1,000 miles out? So the problem is really IUU fishing needs to be stopped at an international level through the World Trade Organization, through conventions. We can place international pressure on countries that are undergoing blatant IUU fishing. This is really a crisis in the ocean when you have these fleets. Around 7,000 Chinese vessels are fishing the high seas, some with these motherships that transport the fish to their floating factories or on-site factories. So they're continually fishing. The US has around 300 vessels on our high seas fleet. The problem is complicated by the large ocean, but it's also the power of the consumer. Ask where your food comes from. Who caught that fish? How was it caught? Where was it caught? was it flagged by a country that recognizes some of these sustainable development goals that have been established by international convention? We as consumers may have the biggest vote, the most power than even governments. If we decide we don't want bluefin tuna, if we decide we don't want shark fin soup, we can decide to support fishermen such as the small boat fleet in Hawaii that is all hook and line. It's generally smaller vessels that don't go out for weeks or months or years at a time. There's no slavery involved, and it's much more sustainable practice than these high seas fisheries or illegal fisheries that are just massively harvesting the ocean with tons of bycatch that are reaching consumers' tables. By consumers and consumer groups or conservation groups like us, we can pressure companies not to buy from countries or companies that sell or practice IUU caught fish.
Many emerging nations and many island nations are recognizing the value of tourism to their local economy. In many cases, areas that have been overharvested or devastated by natural disasters or have lost significant habitats like coral reefs have lost their livelihoods. Tourism can significantly support the rebuilding and economic growth of these communities and their ecosystems. There have and will always be pros and cons to tourism, particularly ecotourism. However, in recent years, ecotourism has become an excellent practice to support these communities' jobs, education, and well-being. When well managed, marine tourism activities such as scuba diving, snorkeling, water sports, and marine animal watching have proven to show significant benefits, most commonly to coastal and island nations. Diving ecotourism is a rapidly growing economy globally, and shark diving in particular has become increasingly popular, which is largely beneficial for marine species that tourists would otherwise not have seen. Participating in dive tourism with sharks offers a larger audience with the opportunity to engage with these animals and their habitats, therefore influencing positive and respectful behavior towards the ocean and its marine life. In many island and coastal nations, such as Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, there has been a huge growth in protecting marine environments and the species that live within them for the purpose of ecotourism and for the purpose of increasing community livelihoods. Many of these areas are true no-take marine reserves, meaning that no fishing can occur, as the tourism related to those areas is so beneficial to the community. Therefore, the incentive to protect those ecosystems are even higher.
One of the emerging trends in marine protected areas is shark-driven protection that is supported by ecotourism. And it's a great sign if you like sharks. It's a great sign if you want to protect apex predators. And in many cases, protecting sharks through tourism actually helps support local economies. Shark sanctuaries or shark diving operations are bringing in money, tourists, dollars that go not just to the tour operator, but it trickles through the local economy to the cab drivers, the boat drivers, the people who work in the hotels, who serve the food. So we're seeing that sharks are far more valuable alive than they are dead. There's a great benefit also in large protected areas that have diving, such as Raja Ampat in Indonesia, some of the protected areas that we're seeing in Hawaii, that we're also able to protect apex predator populations, which are harder to protect in management. We're also protecting apex predators like sharks in protected areas that are generally harder to manage because you need a lot of area. So a large marine protected area is going to protect the migratory pathway for larger sharks and species. In some places in the world, the only way you're going to protect sharks and maintain sharks, especially sharks with high value fit for their fins, is through tourism and marine protected areas. A great example of how we can protect endangered species would be great hammerhead or scalloped hammerhead sharks. Great hammerhead sharks are critically endangered globally. Over 90% of that population has been erased. Scalloped hammerheads are doing not much better. They're easy to hunt because they hang around pinnacles or areas of upwelling, or they go along predictable migratory pathways. So for example, the Hammerhead Highway between Cocos Island, 400 miles off Costa Rica, the Galapagos off Ecuador, Malpelo off of Colombia. It's called the Hammerhead Highway, but also the Sea Turtle Highway. And those, in the case of sea turtles or reptiles or fish like sharks, will annually have these migration patterns, and the boats just sit in the middle and fish them out outside of the protected areas. You could be a tourist and go to Cocos and see hammerheads because they're protected, but if they're not protected in between on that migratory pathway, they're going to get fished out. And we saw that during COVID, when a huge fleet convened between the landmass of Central America and those protected islands. What happened is there was a multinational agreement between Ecuador and Costa Rica to protect the Hammerhead Highway. Now you have a marine protected area that's benefiting from the tourism, that's paying the rangers who are able to enforce the MPAs in the Galapagos and Cocos Island through this high value dive tourism, primarily for sharks, but also sea turtles and marine biodiversity. But they're also protected in between as they migrate to the shores to lay eggs if you're a sea turtle, or to breed or feed if you're a shark. So in many cases where you have a species of shark, like reef sharks, that had these, in some cases, coastal migratory pathways or coastal reproductive areas, they're very easy to fish. They're like sitting ducks. And so tourism, for example, in the case of La Paz, Baja California, the sharks are protected, but also they're being protected because the eyes and ears and love of ecotourists. Protecting the areas in the hot spots is really important. The sharks are protected there, but you need to protect where they're going back and forth. Tourism can benefit from that because tourists can move too with the sharks, and they can go diving and benefit fishing villages along the way that normally would go out perhaps and fish sharks. Now they're going to protect them. Science feeds good decision making when decision makers pay attention to good science. We have more tools for study. We have more scientific knowledge. Applying that science and applying that love to lawmakers is our job as consumers, as educators, as advocates, or as just regular people doing their daily lives. The doomsday bell has rung, with 90% of fish stocks overfished, with half our coral reefs devastated, in decline, with another 25% at risk, with fish down significantly. We know through good science that we need to make good decisions. So we need to rely on advocates to apply that science and also lawmakers to listen to them. The United Nations has taken on a formidable task, but also made some significant commitments towards protecting the ocean with the Sustainable Development Goals. We have a long way to go to achieve those, but many of those goals are almost being met. Increasing marine protected areas is one of the most significant ways we can protect the ocean and also achieve Sustainable Development Goal 14. Overharvesting and IUU fishing remains one of the most significant impacts on apex predators in particular. Protecting local economies is equally as important. So protecting areas that can benefit local economies, whether it be through tourism or through artisanal fishing, is critical for maintaining stability as well as stable and healthy ecosystems. How do we do that? We need to lean on our government. We need to lean on United Nations delegates. Supporting nonprofits that are your representative, are your voice in the ocean is one way that humans can support ocean conservation without traveling to New York, to the United Nations, or wherever these conventions are held. Helping support nonprofits, volunteering for nonprofits through your power, your energy, your intellect is the way that we survive and keep going and keep plugging away at the work that we do as NGOs. There's a lot that the consumer or the regular person can do to protect the ocean, and some of that is supporting passionate advocates like shark stewards who advocate for sharks and where sharks live, and go all the way to the top to tell the representatives that the people care, not just one person, but in some cases, for example, in the EU shark fin ban that's going on right now, millions of signatures were delivered to the EU Commission to tell these parliament members that the world cares, not just people in the EU, that we want to stop the shark fin trade. We want to stop shark finning. We want to stop unsustainable fishing. So millions of people have added their voice. Perhaps the only people that we're going to listen to are the kids. I think bringing our kids up with good science, with an understanding of science, with ocean literacy, not just scientific literacy, understanding why it's important to have a healthy ecosystem, not just one part of it, how the science of marine protection and ecosystem protection can indeed protect all of us. Understanding the complexities of human behavior and human impacts on the ocean is one thing. Applying that knowledge is the next big hurdle. If kids rise up, we get a big blue kid tsunami who says, no, we're not going to take this, what the last 2-3 generations have done. It's not fair. It's not right. We're going to endure it for generations, but we can reverse it. And we know that through good science, that through marine protected areas, through areas that are supported economically through tourism, through strong fisheries management, or in some cases, no fishing, no take whatsoever. Stop killing whales. Don't kill oceanic white tips, because if we do, they're going to be gone in a generation. That's not fair. That's not fair to cultures who have been connected to them for centuries, for thousands of years, like Hawaiians. It's not fair to the future generations because they will not get to see a whale or to get the thrill or experience an oceanic white-tip shark, which is truly one of the most magnificent animals. One of the major SDG 14 goals, Life Below Water, was to support sustainable local economies, artisanal fisheries, cultures, maintaining the cultural integrity and value of fish or fishing to communities. A large part of our planet's population increase is in coastal and island nations. Those are the areas that need to have economic support, as well as supporting healthy fisheries for those people to have protein, to have healthy ecosystems. If we can support small-scale fisheries, we're going to be able to support sustainable fisheries. If you're not coming in with a giant factory ship and scooping everything up and starving coastal peoples, you're going to have more of a sustainable world economy as well. Food security is one of the huge concerns of the United Nations and United States and other countries. We want people to have food because it's more likely we're going to have fewer wars. So if you look at what's happening off of Western Africa, where large countries, including Spain or some of the EU, but especially China, is focusing on large-scale fisheries offshore, they're catching the sharks and the migratory fish that all of those small villages where fishermen are relying on a boat that can only go out during the day and they have to go home, or small sailboats that can sustainably harvest to bring food home to their families. They no longer have that fish because they're being scooped up offshore, either through IUU fishing or through large commercial scale fishing where they don't belong, because they're robbing those nations of their value, of their livelihoods. Reducing this industrial scale fishing, but also supporting local economies and artisanal fisheries is definitely something that will gain a lot of support, particularly in countries that are seeing this loss of a food source as well as a loss of livelihood along their coastal or island areas. We can all protect the ocean by protecting it closest to us. Recognizing that 50% of people, at least in the United States, especially in California, live within 50 miles of the ocean. We can all work together to protect the ocean that is closest to us. If you can drive to the ocean, you can help protect it. Protecting the ocean 200 miles out is more of a challenge. That's where we need to rely on public pressure, recognizing existing international conventions of increasing international regulations on the ocean, but also enforcing national regulations. We need to keep an eye on our lawmakers, apply pressure on lawmakers. So the question is huge. It's as huge as the ocean. It's hard to protect the ocean. It's giant. And so we need to start where we live, support local economies. There is so much we can do to protect the ocean. It's a tough question. It's a huge question, but it's also something that we can solve by creating local scale marine protected areas or sustainable tourism economies protecting species like sharks, larger scale national protections. And then the international scale is the large issue that's facing every person on the planet. And every person on the planet relies on the ocean and ocean health for our future. In many cases, protection doesn't start from the government. It starts from the people. And if you think about Earth Day back in the 1970s, in response to oil spills and pollution in the ocean, the people got mad and they rose up and they said, we don't want this anymore. Going forward 50 years, we need to have that same kind of anger or passion or voice to protect the ocean. And we can. We have more tools than ever to raise our voice, to amplify our voice, to share our message. We can communicate that we want to protect the ocean, and there is a lot of power there.
In order to protect the ocean, people really need to understand how interconnected we are to the planet. We need to make it our mission to protect the ocean, because as much as it is the responsibility of policymakers and governments to create and enforce laws, the ocean is valuable to all of us. Even a small action can make a change. We need to educate ourselves and learn how to value and respect the ocean because we depend on it. Just like a city, the ocean needs all of its pieces to function properly. Without sharks, the fish and coral are not safe. And without healthy, balanced ecosystems, human health and well-being are equally at risk. We have every opportunity and every tool available to protect the ocean, and we can still make a difference. To achieve SDG number 14, life below water, people need to be aware of the importance of ocean health, and they need to care about what's happening because it does affect them. We are all ocean stewards, and we are all shark stewards because our future and the future of our ocean are linked. The ocean could be empty and still look the same from the surface, and that's a scary thought. We're on the right track, and we've made significant progress towards Sustainable Development Goal number 14. But in many of the targets, we still have a ways to go. We've been moving too slowly, and we need to catch up. So have we attained the goal of conserving and sustainably using the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development? Not yet. But we can reach it by 2030. It won't be easy, but it's what we have to do.
This is as good a day as any to start the rebuilding of life. The roads that lay open are many when the old one's gone under the knife. And I can feel the sun on my skin, this morning has a clearer light as any to see the horizon and the far. Excuses were 2 for a penny, but they've all gone out the window of this car. And when I feel the wind on my face, all that ever was is a race. Today and not tomorrow, there's no time to borrow. Today, well, something's gotta give. Today is a good day. Today and not tomorrow, there's no time to borrow. Today, well, something's gotta give. Today is a good day to tomorrow, there's no time to borrow. Today, well, something's gotta give. Today is a good